Have you ever wondered what it's like to record and produce an audiobook? I sure have. Welcome to Audiobook Reviews in 5. This is Jana, also known as Yana, and in this extended length episode, I interview Michael Bafuma to learn more about what it's like to record and produce an audiobook for the first time. Healthcare professional, musician, and actor Michael Bafuma sought new creative outlets during the COVID-19 shutdown. So he decided to try his hand at audiobook narration. Mike and I connected the day before recording this, and we started a fascinating conversation about his experience. So I reiterated a few key points we touched on previously during the recorded interview, too. If you'd like to hear more of Mike's work, check out his ACX profile via the link in my show notes or visit the Audible website. Mike, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Great.
I had a chance to introduce you a moment ago, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on today, where you are as an audiobook narrator and what your experience was like.
Sure. So audiobook narration is relatively new for me. I mean, only within the past year. Actually, professionally, for the past over 20 years now, I've worked as a registered nurse. And about 5 years ago, I left the clinical side of nursing and I took a position in medical sales. Mm-hmm. So when I was working as a nurse, a clinical nurse, I also worked as a nurse educator. And now in sales and when I was an educator, performing is part of my job. I mean, it's something that I have to do. I have to get up there and present material every time like it's the first time I'm presenting it. I have to have that. And that's always been one of the favorite parts of my job and why I like that aspect of my job. So I've always been involved in community theater. I'm a musician. I'm a drummer. I play in local cover bands for fun. I'm what you could call like a hobbyist performer.
Wow.
And so audiobook narration, it was within the past year. In May, I auditioned for the book that caught my eye via the ACX. It stands for Audiobook Creation Exchange platform. I'm registered on that ACX platform as a narrator. This book by Patrick Messervier, Mad Wanderings of a Lost Mind, COVID-19 and Its Effects on Sanity, it caught my eye because Patrick had written his book like in a week. He threw it together. It's like an 85-page book, and he threw it together in a week back in March, like right when the COVID pandemic hit. And he self-published it on Amazon. And he was looking for a narrator that could capture his tone and the crazy feelings that were like racing through his head as he wrote this nonfiction journal of sorts of his thoughts amidst the pandemic. So I submitted my audition and he chose me.
That is awesome. And I want to play listeners a sample from this audiobook because it's quite distinct. It's very zany. There's some really funny parts. And I think all of us can relate on some level to this guy's experience of COVID.
50 million deaths. Think about that for a moment. That's how many people died when the Spanish flu was flexing its flu muscles. When quarantine is required, like at this critical point during COVID-19, stay home. In 1918, no one had a car. It was much easier back then to stay home and imagine what television might be like in the future. In current times, every household has a minimum of 1.25 cars at each home in the U.S. That's more than one vehicle per person. If we are going to be quarantined, those cars are not being used, and you know how it is. A car must be on the road even if we have nowhere to go. What's it going to hurt to take a drive to get in the sights? We can practice social distancing from a box on wheels, right? Then you have to get gas and pick up some food. No one can drive without stuffing their faces with Doritos and sucking down their favorite soda. So now we are going nowhere, practicing social distancing from inside a car and requiring food and drink to satisfy our bad habits of eating and driving. We're all on vacation at the moment, right? Why not? Let's go out and infect more people.
So, Mike, tell me what it was like to record that audiobook.
It was an adventure. It really was. I had so much fun with it. Obviously, I had never met Patrick. We had exchanged a few emails after he hired me for the project, but he and I hit it off on such a level. He said multiple times in interactions that we had that I was the voice inside his head. That as he listened to, I don't know what they're really called in the audiobook world, the dailies, the 15-minute samples that I would send him. He was like, you've nailed it. You've hit it right on the head. I mean, from that first part of that sample that's available on Audible, that 50 million deaths. That's how many people died. I mean, just that over the top insanity of what we're dealing with this. And it caught him and it related to him. And he was like, yeah, you're the guy that's rattling around in my head as I'm thinking of, as I'm writing all this down. And then we found each other. So it was pretty cool that happened.
Yeah, how fortuitous. And just stepping back to what you said a moment ago, comparing sample recordings to dailies, I didn't know that happened with audiobooks. So can you tell me what that's like? Is that a process of recording a certain length of the book and then you send it back to the author for their approval? Is that typical with most audiobook recording processes, or do you find that with this one it was different because it was your first recording and so you were approaching it a little bit more strategically because you wanted to make sure that you were aligning to the right tone and the style of humor and the nature of the topic?
I think all of that you just said is true, but ACX, the Audiobook Creation Exchange, has a very strict policy of what needs to be done in order to get through from concept to publication. And one of those is submitting a 15-minute sample of your narration. You audition, then the rights holder, the person who owns the book, chooses you, and then you have to record 15 minutes of the book for then the rights holder, the author, to have that right of first refusal to determine, okay, I like where you're going, I like your style, I like as opposed to just the 90-second or 2-minute audition, it's a full 15 minutes of, all right, this is where this voice actor's going with this. And but I think everything you said is true in that it's a great way for it being my first book that I was professionally narrating, to make sure I was right and make sure the author liked where I was going and make sure that I had the direction that we were aligned in where we were taking this. But yeah, it was the one sample. And then once he heard that, then when the book was completed, I would upload chapter by chapter, and he could go in at any time on the website and check the chapters and send me an email back going, geez, you mispronounced this word wrong, or I didn't like, you went in a different direction here. Can you re-record this? And Patrick was excellent. I've heard there have been stories of people asking for a lot of retakes, but Patrick really... like I said, we clicked, and he really liked where I was taking it, and it was very minimal with the redos and the rewrites and the retakes.
That's great. And one of the things you mentioned was having a sample recording on the site so that you could set up your profile. And when I spoke with you previously, so listeners won't know this, but there's a fun coincidence here because a while back I recorded a bit of a tribute to why I love audiobooks. And one of the titles I mentioned was The Velveteen Rabbit, because that was one of my favorite childhood recordings. And so you were laughing when I mentioned that to you earlier, because you had recorded this as your sample. So tell me a little bit about that and your experience choosing that title and thinking through what you were going to use to represent your style.
So, like I said, I've always been a performer. From music, comedy, drama, I've always found ways to incorporate my desire to perform into what I do. And when the lockdown came in mid-March as a result of the pandemic, I lost that aspect of my life. I couldn't be in plays anymore.
That's right.
Back in November, I was in a community theater production of A Few Good Men. And I hadn't been on stage in 10 years. Life gets in the way, kids, family, shuttling back and forth to soccer practice, So I loved that. And I was like, wow, here I'm at an age now where I can get back into performing. And then everything just shut down. So I needed to find a way. I needed an outlet to find a way. And as a musician and a recording enthusiast, I have all the equipment I need to record and produce my own audio tracks. So I took a free course online, learn about the nuances of producing a digital audio track, and I decided I wanted to try narrating an audiobook. So in order to do that, at first I talked to a friend of mine that I'm in a band with, and he had a 400-page novel. It was like a 10-hour read. And I said, I want to just fool around and read your book. It was called The Professor.
And this is on Audible, by the way, for anyone listening. The sample sounds amazing, so I think it's probably worth checking out.
Yes, it's called The Professor by Jerry Garish. It's a work of fiction. And it was just going to be a labor of love. It was something I was going to do in my basement. But then I really got into it.
Yeah.
I really started. I was acting. I was acting in the comfort of my own basement in front of a microphone, and it was a pleasure. So I got bitten by the bug, and I wanted to do more. So I found this acx.com as a means of getting my work out there, and I had to set up a profile.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to set up a profile, I needed to record something, and I was like, what am I going to record? And I remembered that one of the things that I really loved to do when my children were little was I would read to them.
Yeah.
And they loved when I would read to them because I would do voices. I would, do the little high-pitched bunny voice and the big, deep elephant voice.
Characters.
And I would have a lot of fun with it, and they would love it. They're like, my wife would offer to read them a story, and they'd be like, well, can Dad do it? Because he does all the voices. And so I decided, I said, well, I looked up some different stories, and I said, oh, I always liked reading The Velveteen Rabbit. So that's when I found that The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams.
Aww.
And that was my first sample, and it's out there. It's on my ACX profile. But then I started auditioning, and I put that one out there, built my profile, said that I was a new audiobook narrator with no experience narrating audiobooks, just a love of theater and a love of sound production, and then I found Patrick's book. And I auditioned for Patrick's book, and I got the gig. And then I said, well, then let's put Jerry's book out there too. So I asked Jerry if he would release the rights to Audible so that we could make an audiobook. And then it's been an amazing 6-month ride.
That is so cool. It just all came about organically. You wanted to try something different. COVID pushed you in a direction that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of, maybe. And there's a lot of voice acting and voiceover work these days, of course, but you really were drawn to the idea of audiobooks. And I think you might have compared that yesterday when I spoke with you to the marathon versus the sprint. So tell me a little bit about what it's like to get into the right headspace. So I'm imagining you recording. You're recording a little bit every day. You're going to your studio in your home and you're trying to think through getting into the voice of this character. It's a real person, but for all intents and purposes, for readers, for listeners, it's a character. So how would you do that? How would you approach that versus a much shorter recording or voiceover work?
That analogy, that marathon versus a sprint, is an excellent analogy because it's when I told people that I wanted to. I told people that I was doing like community theater with that I wanted to go into voiceover work, and that I was specifically thinking about audiobooks. I was met with a lot of like resistance, like, well, why would you do that? I mean, like voiceover work, it's a quick hit. You go in and you record a 30-second spot for a local car dealership, or, you go into your best radio voice, WXYZ, Connecticut. And I was like, no. I said, no, the audiobook for me was the closest to like a stage production where you're actually developing the characters and you're reading the whole novel, you're reading the whole script, and you're training yourself for the long haul. You're becoming that character. I mean, I'll admit I was kind of sad when both books were done. I mean, I was like, I couldn't be them anymore. I couldn't be those. I couldn't be inside Patrick's head anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll just text him every now and then just to say hi because I miss him. But
I've lived in your head for a couple hours. How's that?
I know, and so it's that same kind of like. The same way you have to train, I could imagine, for running a marathon is you have to commit to what you said earlier, to your point about you have to go into that recording studio for 2 hours a night to put down a couple chapters, and you have to keep it in the back of your head that this is what I was doing with this character. And something may have happened in my life upstairs that morning that may change, and I may come down and I may want to read that character completely differently, but I can't because I already committed to what that character was going to be when I recorded the chapters before. And it's a much longer process, and it actually has made me appreciate and love audiobooks more because I never really realized what went into them until you actually do it.
Yeah, that's great. What are some of your favorite titles, Mike, in terms of ones you might recommend, ones you've enjoyed over the years? Any favorite narrators? I'd love to know. So
that's a very good question because I recently got into audiobooks. Changing jobs from more of a clinical nurse to one that's out there in sales, I spend a lot of time in my car.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to podcasts and I'm also listening to audiobooks. And the first one that I downloaded and listened to was Ronda Rousey's autobiography called My Fight, Your Fight. And I'm sure everybody knows who Ronda Rousey is, but Ronda Rousey, UFC fighter, first female bantamweight champion in the UFC, first female allowed to fight in the UFC. Just a brilliant, brilliant story. And what amazed me was she's a black belt in judo. She's a professional fighter in the UFC. She's not an actor.
Yeah.
She is now because of all the success that she's had with ultimate fighting and wrestling and so on. But
and does she narrate her own book? I haven't heard it.
She did. She read it herself, and it was so amazing to hear. It was like she was sitting in the car with me, telling me her story in her own voice, and that hooked me. I heard that. So then, staying in that vein of very successful women who've had amazing careers, the next one I picked up was Amy Poehler's autobiography, Yes, Please.
Nice.
And now she's an actress.
Yeah.
I mean, she's an improv. She founded the Upright Citizens Brigade way back when. Huge career on SNL, movies. She's a performer, and so that was just I I'm not overusing the word when I say that it was brilliant. I mean, her inflection, her tone, her pacing, was perfect. Slowing down when she got to the more serious points in her life, like the birth of her child, and actually what she was going through when she was pregnant, working on SNL, to the wild and zany stuff. I mean, she just killed it. And so after listening to those two, I was hooked. My next favorite was Kill Alex Cross.
Oh, what's that
by
one?
James Patterson. James Patterson, the Alex Cross series. Alex Cross from the movies. I think Morgan Freeman played him in Along Came a Spider
Oh,
and Kiss
right.
the Girls.
Of course.
And then Tyler Perry played him when he's younger. But the book that I read was narrated. Andre Braugher, the actor, he's in Glory and most recently Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He read the part of Alex Cross. And I mean, to hear the professional actor take that, and not be reading a screenplay or a script, and actually be reading a novel and using the inflection to read the novel. And like I said with Amy Poehler, the pacing and the when to go up a third in your voice and when to come down and when to, I mean, it was like a masterclass in narration. And one more thing I want to say about favorite audiobooks.
Yeah, great.
Another great use for audiobooks is Shakespeare.
Mm.
We have all read Shakespeare in high school or college, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Shakespeare was meant to be performed.
So true.
Shakespeare, right? I mean, Shakespeare was not meant to sit and have a high school kid reading, but soft, what light through yonder window. No, it was made for professional actors to take those words and work with them. And I recently downloaded Macbeth, which was read by the Scottish actor Alan Cumming.
Oh, he's brilliant. I love Alan Cumming.
And to hear him with he has the most, I mean, listening to his brogue it's like a symphony. I mean, his voice, it's like, I can't even hold a candle to the way that man's voice. And to hear him read all the different characters in Macbeth, even when he reads Lady Macbeth, it's not silly.
Wow.
It's not like, oh, here's a guy doing a woman's voice. And no, I mean, it was, he did, it's a book that I could listen to again and again.
I think I'm going to have to listen to that one because it sounds intriguing. And I really enjoyed Alan's autobiography. If you have a chance to check that one out, he also reads it. He had quite a difficult life, so it made me appreciate his work all the more because in spite of all of that, he's known for this sharp wit and he's got this distinct style that just makes him a pleasure to watch or to listen to. So thanks for mentioning that. That's awesome.
And the most recent ones that I've listened to, it's gotten a little drier. My daughter really got me into Hamilton recently. I mean, with Disney Plus putting Hamilton out for July 4th. So I've been listening to the Federalist Papers, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights.
Wow.
All just some of the most the driest material that you could possibly imagine. But again, it all comes down to the performer. If the performer is able, if I'm listening to the Federalist Papers and I can actually feel that it's Hamilton or Jay reading it to me, and I really feel that they're reading it with the same passion that they wrote it, that they used to write it. If it's just someone sitting there just reading, "We the people of the United States in order to form," no, you're going to lose me.
Yeah.
But if you're using that performance aspect of it and using and finding a narrator that is able to perform and not just read the words on the page, it makes it completely changes the experience. I mean, reading a book for pleasure is one thing, but hearing someone else perform it and unlocking something as a listener in yourself that's it makes you almost want to get the actual book and read it yourself and see what your mind does to the words, after hearing someone else read it aloud.
I have had that experience so many times, and I find it funny when folks say, oh, audiobooks, it's not really reading, it's not the same. And I want to say, people have been listening to storytelling for thousands of years. We're actually way more accustomed to listening to oral narration. And it's an art, right? When you think of classics like the Iliad or the Odyssey, those were intended to be listened to and performed. And to your point about Shakespeare again, it's really a much more modern invention, the novel and written poetry, that's only been in the last few hundred years, so relatively modern, where people were expected to sit down and read. And I think audiobook technology and recording is kind of bringing us back full circle to a really primal human experience of listening to stories and hearing a voice interpret emotions and interpret experience. And that's what makes audiobooks so magical to me, and something that I feel it adds a lot to my life, especially during COVID, and we don't always have access to all the people in person that we'd love to see or hear. Is there a certain element that you draw on when you think about how much you enjoy acting and how much you've enjoyed performance elements in your work life even, that you draw on in your audiobook recording and narration experience?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Sure. I'll elaborate a little bit. So when you think about how you would approach acting, reciting lines on a stage, comparing it to reading an audiobook, you are the only character, right? You're the only, sorry, I should say you're the only reader. So unlike a play where you're kind of counting on reacting to other actors on the stage as a rule, and you're playing off of their energy, and you're using their style to form your own style and create an experience for the audience. An audiobook typically is just one narrator. So you're not reacting to someone else's energy on stage. You're not interpreting somebody else's body language in the room. You're really creating an experience for the listener with all of your talent and your passion and your abilities. So when you think about that, and this draws a little bit on your experience of returning to the previous day's work and having to reset, go into that recording session with the same tone and style. When you think about that, is that all of that experience and all of that approach to audiobook narration, do you feel like that's become a niche that you want to pursue even more? So let's say, COVID ends, eventually you can go back to stage acting. Do you feel like there's a distinct experience of recording audiobooks that you want to build on and continue to develop as a voice actor?
Thank you for that explanation, because I have a tendency to be a little slow.
No,
sometimes.
Not at all. I think I was being vague, actually.
But no, that I get exactly what you're saying, and my answer is this: for me, nothing will ever replace the stage, and you hit the nail on the head perfectly with you feed off of energy. You feed off of the energy of the audience. You feed off the energy of the other actors on the stage. It's not just the words on the page. As you get into like film and TV, it becomes more, there are going to be times when you're just delivering a scene face to face with the camera and not that other actor. Mm-hmm. And you have to have that same energy as when you're delivering it, and then to an actor. You're delivering it to an inanimate object. You're delivering it to a camera. But you have to emote the same way you would. Audiobooks takes it even one step further. And now you're potentially sitting in your pajamas in a basement in front of a microphone and trying to become this character. Yeah. So if you look at it as like a spectrum, for me, no, it'll never replace the stage. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's amazing. I have fallen in love not as much with the performance aspect of it, which I love, but the production aspect of it. I think making a professional sounding recording as a producer is as important to the final product as the performance itself.
Absolutely.
If you hear my kids playing Xbox in the background and you hear my chair squeaking and you hear all these things while I'm trying to perform an audiobook for you, I'm going to lose you as a listener. So production is as important as the performance, but I don't think it could ever replace the energy. And I think that's why so many actors who do like film and TV have to get back to the stage.
Yeah.
Because the stage, nothing can replace that electricity of playing off another person and reacting, like you said. I love that that method acting of reacting. You're not acting, you're reacting. And so it is a wonderful way to express myself. It is a wonderful way to keep my chops of character development up, but I don't ever see it replacing the stage.
It's not a full-time gig, but something that you're exploring. And to that point, fair enough. I think acting is an incredibly rich experience. And if you can't be on stage right now because of COVID, why not explore some other options? But at the same time, I'm curious to know, would you be interested in producing and performing in, let's say, like a radio play where you have other actors that, you are reacting a little bit to them, or even producing a recording of Shakespeare or another play designed to deliver an audio experience similar to what people might experience in a stage play? Is there room for that? Do you see any opportunities out there for voice actors to produce that type of work?
Oh, absolutely. I know the work is out there. I just haven't found it yet personally. But it is something that I would absolutely, if given the opportunity, would jump at. I remember when I was very, very young, probably in the early 80s, I remember when the BBC, and again, this was before we could look it up on the internet. This was, you had to go to the library and get the record or the cassette. The BBC did the Star Wars radio play.
Wow.
And they did, so they took the screenplay and adapted it to a radio play, and they added different pieces and made it more like a novelization of the screenplay and performed it in a studio. And I remember getting my hands on that and listening to that on my old 33 LP record player in my parents' house. And yes, that would be incredible to be able to get involved in something like that. Again, the flexibility isn't there that you have with audiobooks. Audiobooks, you're on your schedule. You can go into your home studio and record whenever you want. With the radio play, I think it's a little bit more difficult to do it asynchronous because then otherwise it just turns into a scripted read.
Yeah.
And you really need to be able to all either be together in the same studio to get that energy to act off each other and perform off each other. But yes, I would in a heartbeat do that if that were offered. Cool.
I'll have to keep an eye out. And in the meantime, are there any genres that you would love to explore from an audiobook recording perspective? Are you interested in trying more nonfiction, any specific type of fiction? What sparks your interest?
Okay, this may sound like a trite answer. This might sound like I'm
Okay.
like trying to take the easy way out, but really anything.
Yeah.
I find that I'm not only voice acting if I'm narrating fiction. Nonfiction, and I mentioned this already with Patrick's work, I'm acting when I'm reading nonfiction too. I mean, with Patrick's Mad Wanderings, I had to become him. I had to get inside his head, and there's a good scene in the book, and again, no spoilers, but there's a good scene in the book where he has a heart-to-heart with his wife, and I never had that discussion with my wife about what's going on with COVID. It didn't get to that level for me.
Okay.
That it got to for Patrick, with concern about work and safety and health, and so I had to find that. I had to find that from somewhere else, and it became a character, and so. I think the challenge, I mean, if someone asked me to read the phone book, it would be a challenge to try to find a way to make it interesting and make it engaging. So, I think even if you're reading an instruction manual, you're reading it so that it is the person listening is engaged and giving it the same attention. They want to know. They chose that book for a reason.
Good point.
They downloaded that book and want that book, and they need to get something out of that. And I feel no matter what genre it is, from horror, romance, fiction to an instruction manual, I have to. It's still a work. It's still a work of fiction to me because it's not my reality.
Right.
I have to make it my reality, and that's where the performance comes in.
That's great. It sounds like you're super open to trying just about anything and having fun with it. I think that's a great attitude whenever you're learning something new, is getting a handle on different styles, different content. And I think the point you make about trusting the listener, they picked that title because they want to be engaged with it. Maybe it wasn't necessarily a personal choice. Maybe they have to listen to it for work or for school, but knowing that they have to listen to it or that they want to listen to it, you want to make it as engaging and interesting as possible. And that seems like the right approach to have, as opposed to kind of taking a formal style and just trying to adapt it. And I think I find your curiosity about this and willingness to try new genres is really inspiring, because on some level you're obviously going outside your comfort zone. These are not all books or genres that you're necessarily familiar with, but you're willing to dive in and try it out for fun. And I'd like to know, when you think about books that you've read over the years, are there any that you think you would love to narrate? That, you've got a favorite book that, that would be such a great character to present, or I know that I could do this one justice. Are there any titles that come to mind for you?
Anything by Stephen King.
Oh, classic.
Anything by Stephen King. I would love, of course, the opportunity to narrate. I know the original publication was called The Body, but Stand By Me, for example. But the problem is, now every time I hear the narration in Stand By Me, it's Richard Dreyfuss. Right. And it will always be Richard Dreyfuss. And that's the only voice I hear. But anything by Stephen King. Really, there are so many books that I've read. Dickens would be another, Tale of Two Cities would be a great one. Just one thing that comes to mind just off the top of my head is looking at traditionally when they adapt Tale of Two Cities to the screen, a lot of times the actor playing Darnay and Carlton, Sidney Carlton and Charles Darnay, I think, they're always the same actor because they look so much alike, and one winds up going to the guillotine for the other. How I would do that, how I would have two distinct characters, but their voice would have to be the same. How would you change the inflection to let the reader know when it's Sidney talking as opposed to Charles, even though they're supposed to be so similar in their physical appearance. So that's one that's always intrigued me too. So I don't know if there's an audiobook version of Tale of Two Cities out there. I'm sure there's multiple ones out there, but I haven't come across one yet. That I've listened to.
It's great to have inspiration, though, right? When you have ideas of stories that you know are going to challenge you from a style and performance perspective, it's exciting because you can think about it from a more strategic point of view and think about, what is the listener going to hear when I present these two characters who are so similar, for example, with the Dickens example. And one of the things I've always wondered about, if I might ask, audiobook narration as a listener, it's seamless, it's enjoyable, you relax, you listen to the narrator, but it's actually a lot of work. To your point, the marathon idea, you're doing a lot of repetition and re-recording. But what are some other surprising elements of recording audiobooks that listeners might not know about? Or another question related to that is, if a listener is interested in recording an audiobook, where should they start? How do they go about practicing? Are there vocal exercises people should do? I realize I'm bombarding you with a few different questions here, so feel free to answer them as you will.
Well, I think as a self-published narrator, and focusing on a lot of self-published works that are out there on Amazon and Audible, for example, production is a big thing. If you want to be the narrator, the narration part, the vocal acting part is such a small part of it. It is probably a tenth of it. The other 90% is sitting in front of your computer and editing out the chair squeaks and the clicks and the pops and the ums and the swallows,
yes,
and the pauses and the taking a sip of water because you've been talking for 2 hours straight, which I love. The production part is a huge part of it. It was the part I had to work on the most. The voice acting part, I think, came very natural to me. I didn't, to your question about vocal exercises and training, and I know from my experience in on stage doing all the different warm-ups, like the hissing and the clicking and the going up the scale and down the scale and all that. I wouldn't say I did so much of that. The one thing I did know is you should record at the same time of day. I did find that out, and listeners might not know that, because this would be my voice at 11 o'clock in the morning, but then if I knew my kids were going to be home and I had a busy day and I had to get up at 4 or 5 and come downstairs and record, then my voice would be down here. And it was, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it back up to my normal
energy,
level of intensity.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was, that was tough, was committing to a schedule and finding exactly when I'm going to record. But focusing on the production aspect, I think, is the biggest. If this is something that you're really serious about doing and you like to perform and you want to give audiobook narration a try, understanding that it is not a lucrative hobby if you have to pay a producer to produce your book that you're going to be making a royalty share on Audible, because then you're winding up spending a lot of money for a professional to produce something, when if you produce it yourself, it's much more lucrative for you. But the thing is, are you willing to take that step and commit yourself to learning enough production to put out a professional product?
Great point. Yeah, there's probably some folks that don't have the patience or the technical patience specifically to learn all of that, and maybe they're willing to pay for a producer. But if you can enjoy that part of the process, and it sounds like you do, you're going to get a lot out of it, and you're going to enjoy the learning aspect of it too. And then knowing that you not only recorded, but you produced that work, that's something to be proud of, surely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm realizing that we're at time. Is there any any points, are there any thoughts or ideas that you would like to share about your experience or recommend to anybody who loves audiobooks, anyone who wants to record audiobooks?
Just to recap what I just said was, if you are committed to making a professional sounding product that is going to engage your reader, hold their attention, it's going to greatly increase your chances of getting noticed. And a little luck doesn't help. Doesn't hurt. I'm sorry. A little luck doesn't hurt either. You could have the most, you could have the classic radio voice, which I do not. You could, I'm telling you, I honestly think this happened and Patrick took the chance on me because I fit what he needed for that. I mean, if he had Tom Hanks or Andre Braugher or Alan Cumming read his book, I don't think it would have had the same intensity as my panic-stricken, all over the place, sometimes screechy. I think it was just the right voice at the right time, and it's a lot of luck, but just putting out something that you're proud of and putting out something that you feel is professional, that you could come back to in a month and listen to again and say, wow, I really gave that my all and did a good job with that. My kids make fun of me because I will listen to the finished books now that they're out on Audible and critique myself and say, ooh, I wish I could have recorded that one again. I didn't like how that came out. But yeah, it's so much fun, and it's such a good way to keep your skills up as a performer, if that's something that you're interested in doing, even if it's a hobby.
That's great. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing all of this, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are curious about audiobooks and how they're recorded, but they don't necessarily have that hands-on experience. And this has just been fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing your experience and all of your insights, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoy the book.
I am. It's great. Lots of laughs, that's for sure. Who knew cheese curls would be so life-sustaining?
I'm telling you, it's a staple. It's a staple on the spaceship.
That's all for this extended interview episode of Audiobook Reviews in 5. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you'd like to hear more of Mike's work, check out his ACX profile via the link in my show notes, or visit the Audible website. Next week, you can expect to hear another audiobook review of Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson and read by Robin Miles. And a friendly reminder, if you've not yet done so, please consider subscribing to Audiobook Reviews in 5 on your favorite platform. By subscribing, you help increase the profile of this podcast and the chances of other listeners like you finding it. I look forward to checking in with you all again soon. Please stay safe and be well.